question is
Sorry, yes, of
uh,
course. The main
my main
question.
question is about the government systems. I've watched so many Islamic YouTube channels so far, like Daniel Hakikachu, and they're very strong critiques of democracy. As a Muslim, I never knew this. I never knew that Islam is something that is against democracy. And I've also seen you also criticize democracy as well. So you guys always criticize democracy, but you don't give an alternative solution to it. Or I'm a bad listener. I'm a bad
No, but look,
audience.
democracy, bro.
Uh,
Listen.
yeah.
Democracy is used by everyone who, like, especially if we're talking about representative democracy, instrumentally. No one uses democracy in and of itself. They use it as a means to an end.
Mhm.
And scholars who said that we should use democracy in elections and whatever, which is the majority of them in the Muslim world, they don't really have a different conception to the rest of whoever uses democracy. They're saying we use democracy as a means to the end, not as an end of itself. What's so different about how Muslims use democracy to try and bring Sharia law or whatever it is into place, to the way that Kuffar use it to try and bring whatever ideology into place? Democracy in and of itself is meant as a tool to be used instrumentally. When it's seen as an end in and of itself is where it becomes quite unusual. And it's not being critiqued by Muslim people. It was critiqued Hellenistically by Plato. Plato was saying, why should we entrust to foolish people with our affairs? Like, democracy has had its critics, but the truth of the matter is, if you put democracy, a liberal democracy, it's going to have tensions with other things: sovereignty of state, individual rights. There's always going to be a tension of democracy and something else in it, and human rights, whatever it may be. And so, democracy, if understood instrumentally, I'm not saying is impossible to be used by Muslim people. That's not our stance. Our stance is it can be used instrumentally, and I don't think that stance really differs that much from people that use democracy elsewhere.
Yeah, and we need to make a distinction between the question and the intention behind the question, not yours, but when people make accusations. Because when they say, Islam's against democracy, what they really mean sometimes is Islam's against the rule of law, Islam's against considering people's opinions, Islam is against communal cohesion, Islam is against minority rights, which is all not true. We have our own conception of these things. And this is why it's very important to look at the underlying psychology behind such a question, because democracy is used as some kind of golden calf. Yeah, it's like an idol for people, isn't it? Yeah, and we just have to be intellectual about this. There's critiques of of these ways of doing politics and establishing authority, and we have to uncover what do people really mean. Is Islam against the opinions of people? No. Does Islam have the concept of consultation and transparency? Yes. Does Islam have the concept of accountability? Absolutely. Does Islam have the concept of taking care of human rights? In our fiqh, we have huquq al-ibad, the rights of the individuals. We have, the concept of minority fiqh concerning the Ahl Kitab and so on and so forth. So we have all of these nuances, and we have, with all due respect, a beautiful CV of over 1,000 years of relative success. And when you compare it to the CV of more modern persuasions, it's not that great. It's probably been the bloodiest 1 or 2 or 3 centuries that we've had in history. Yeah,
probably more people died in the last 100 years than ever has in all these schisms.
Absolutely. So obviously technology has a role to play in this as well. So we can't compare apples and pears. But the point being is that if people mean that Islam's against all of these things, of course, in actual fact, there is a really good thesis to put forward, which is that the rule of law even came from Islam anyway. The rule of law was adopted from the madhahib. There's some, I don't have the references to my head, but we'll have to try and bring them out, that there is a connection between the stability of Islam and Islamic governance in history, especially in Islamic Spain. It was called paradise on earth by Western academics. It was a convivencia, a coexistence. With all due respect, these Muppets, sorry for using French, when they're using their phone to attack Islam, they're using something that needs the algorithm. The algorithm could never have been could have been produced without the Prophet ﷺ that established these amazing principles to create this convivencia and coexistence that Muslims and non-Muslims could actually come together to look into the internet connecting principles of nature and develop these things. In actual fact, Professor Thomas Arnold, he makes a great case. He says Muslim Spain was like that kind of milestone that was they jumped off. It was like catapult themselves Europe, when they took over Toledo again and found all of these amazing manuscripts, they took it to Europe, and you had the development of Europe as a result of Islamic Spain, and not necessarily Muslims. Remember, it was non-Muslims that developed great poetry and astronomy and sciences as well. But there was a coexistence, a convivencia that was occurring as a result, and you could argue directly from Quranic principles and prophetic principles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Take for example Musa bin Maymun, Maimonides. He's considered the second Moses in the Jewish tradition, right? He came from where? He wrote in Arabic. He came from Islamic Spain. So even the scientific method, they used the phone, without science, you wouldn't have the phone. They used the phone to attack Islam, but this phone most likely couldn't have been into existence without the likes of many people, Muslim and non-Muslim, but one includes a key milestone, Ibn al-Haytham. Read David C. Lindbergh's book on the history of science. He talks about Ibn al-Haytham was instrumental for the development of the systematic scientific method. So, and you could trace these things back to Islam. If you look at Ibn al-Haytham's biographical accounts, if you read the biographical accounts referenced by Stephens, you will see that Ibn al-Haytham quotes that he wanted to find out the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifesting itself in reality. So there's Islamic spiritual and political or value-based connections to these things, and it's things that we could learn from. Why do we think we have to learn from, why does progress mean that we have to adopt the thinking of a Greek man that even disagreed with his original idea? Do you know what I mean? That's a Plato. He was like, what the heck? The mob can rule. So we can learn from all civilizations, and this is a prophetic attitude to have, to learn from all peoples. There's an authentic hadith, I believe it's in Sahih Muslim, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he looked into the Greeks or the Romans and Persians for medical things. So this teaches us, and this was about the cohabitation of women that were suckling their babies, and this teaches us that when it comes to things like this, okay, fine, it doesn't refer to politics or values, but when it shows that there should be an inter-civilizational discussion of how to move forward on certain things. And when it comes to science and living together, Islam has a great CV, and there's lots to learn. And all the kind of aberrations and maybe the negative things you see in Islamic history, you would argue that it's not necessarily linked to the values of Islam. It's more power hungry. It's more about ego. And that's why it's very important for us not to over-glorify our history, because over-glorifying one's history is actually a sign of a defeated mind. We have to be honest. There's been some dark things in our history as well. But on the whole, lots to learn. Lots to learn.